What is your horror story from DNA tests like 23andMe? My sister found out that half our mom's side of the family are products of incest up and until a few great aunts and uncles. My grandfather did not die when my dad was 4 like we always thought. Instead, he faked his death, walked 1,500 kilometers to the other end of the country, married a 16-year-old girl and had 7 more children, all the while leaving my grandmother to bring up the 6 children he had with her and his 2 children from an earlier marriage. Worst part was that he used the same names for the second batch of kids as his first lot. Not me, but my coworker found out his bio-dad was not who he thought he was. Turns out he is one of the many children of fertility doctor Donald Klein. There's a Netflix doc about him if you've never heard about him. My mom's generation has been really big into tracing our family tree. Turns out Grandpa had 2 families that we know of. If that wasn't enough to discourage my family from uncovering skeletons, a few years later one of my cousins took a 23andMe test to find out that our grandfather is also her dad. About 3 years ago, I took a 23andMe test because I always had suspected, or maybe hoped, that my sister's dad was also my dad. He was in my life from the beginning because my bio-dad was a piece of work. Well, he isn't my father. And neither is the man who I grew up believing was my dad. My sister-in-law did some digging and found my real biological father. He's the one who reached out, did a DNA test, wanted to meet me and my children and introduce me to my siblings. For a while I held off because it was such a shock and I felt like it was moving really quickly. 4 months after we had first started talking, we met and I was welcomed with open arms by everyone. And even though it was still a little weird and I was super nervous, I am glad I took the chance to meet him. He died from COVID complications just 8 months after we found out he was my real dad. My parents and I all did DNA tests and I managed their profiles. Theirs were done before mine was available. They each got a panic message from a woman on the other side of the world who had matched as their daughter. She was distraught, thinking her parents had lied to her for her entire life. When I logged into my account, it showed that I had no DNA matches with my parents, which I knew to be wrong. Plus the fact my mom was a young child when this woman was born made it clear the company had swapped our results. Customer service just said, "Oh well," and offered a new test. My family found it funny, but that poor woman who had spent several days freaking out thinking her life was a lie before I got her messages and responded. Found out my dad isn't my biological father. My dad's sister gave me a DNA test for the holidays. I ended up taking it and discovered I wasn't related to my aunt, aka not related to my dad, but I have 10+ half-siblings with whoever my sperm donor dad is. They gaslit me for months saying the results were inaccurate, called me a liar to my sister, all this garbage, then finally admitted it was true after 6+ months of lying. We now have a terrible relationship. Grew up pretty normal for the most part. Divorced parents but happy life. Wanted to know how my ancestry since I don't know past my paternal great-grandmother's maiden name. Got the results this past Christmas Eve. Found a half-sister, along with 2 other half-siblings. That is too old to be my dad's. He'd have been a literal child. And put 2 and 2 together and it turns out my dad is not my father. Can't ask my mom. She's dead. My bio father is dead and no one knows anything, and the people I have told, no one on my dad's side, too scared to break that news, are shocked. I know nothing about this man but his name and his mom's name, who is also gone. I believe. I just find out this big OL bombshell so suddenly and then hit a dead end just as quickly. It was an interesting and juicy Christmas for sure. I'm 55% Swiss though, which is random as hell. Well, it's not my horror story. But police arrested the guy who murdered my mother decades ago because someone in the killer's family used one of those tests. The submitted DNA allowed them to get a match on a grandparent. And a couple of years later, when they subpoenaed his DNA to corroborate their other police work, he confessed. It took 40 years. But I imagine this is a hell of a horror story for him. He wasn't ever a suspect before the DNA match. My mother was one of 7 children of an abusive mother and beloved father. 20 grandchildren. My cousins, my brother and me. Through testing, some cousins have determined that at least 3 of the 7 children were not the biological offspring of my grandmother's husband. We aren't telling all the other cousins until the last uncle dies. He's 93. Someone in my grandparents' generation gave up a baby for adoption 60 years ago, and our family still doesn't know, won't admit who it was. She only joined 23andMe because her daughters encouraged her to find out more about her birth family. For health reasons, we now have family members who won't take the test. My cousin trying to scam the government, claiming minuscule percentage Native American, submitted a sample. What did happen was 4 children he fathered with 4 women other than current wives found him. One of my best friends called me one day in a panic. She did one with her father for fun. He is not her father. Turns out Mummy has many skeletons in the closet. Bio Dad never knew she existed and was so happy to find her. We now doubt her sister's father is her father. Just a gigantic domino effect of not good. My kid took the test, and 8 years later, introduced me to a half-sister I never knew I had. My father had remarried and had a son I knew about. But this younger sister took us both by surprise. And the father in all this has passed on. So, I got a sister now. My father is from a country that is literally split in half. Half the country is ethnically Greek and the other half is ethnically Turkish. There is a long history of bad blood and our capital is split down the middle. We are culturally Greek, but thanks to my brother's impulse decision DNA test, we learned that we are ethnically more Turkish. Not really a horror story, but goes to show how stupid war is. I thought I was all French. Turns out I'm very English! Exclamation mark. I'm adopted and was hoping to find out family info and hopefully who my birth parents were. Found out my birth father sexually abused the kids of one of his girlfriends and is currently serving 45 years. Also, he committed multiple armed robberies in the past. On top of that, he's into a bunch of weird Africans are the real Native Americans beliefs that he's using to try and get out of prison. Not sure he actually believes all of it, but he did a DNA test in the first place to try and claim to be Native. That whole side of my gene pool is into weird religious stuff. Plus the guy he thought was his father isn't. His mom had an affair and his real dad, my grandfather, had recently also just got out of prison for attempted murder, then died from COVID. Pretty sure he was in the drug trade in Miami in the 80s as well. Safe to say I want zero contact from anyone on that side. My other half is Native and the horror stories are just all the teams they went through in residential schools and literally being moved to Indian territory and being given the last name orphan because all their family died. Also, my birth mother was basically stolen from her family and given to a white family, and none of her siblings even know she exists. I am beyond lucky I didn't have to grow up in any of that environment. Not a horror story, but certainly unexpected. My sister did 23andMe and matched with a niece. Apparently my brother 40 meters, unbeknownst to him, has a daughter. From her age we can tell she must have been born when my brother was in high school. The bio mom must have given her up for adoption without telling my brother. No bad feelings. They would have been so young. Like 15 years old. So it was for the best. I actually found out I have the cancer gene from one of these tests. BRCA1. And my whole family was tested as well. My sister, brother and dad all have it too. We now get preventative cancer testing, but who knows, it could have very well saved one of our lives down the road. Not really horror story overall, but when I first found out it was extremely scary, as I was just expecting to get some entertaining report back and instead found out I had a serious health condition. Not a horror story. Just made me sad. I did it. See, I'm adopted and I've always wanted to find relatives. Found a couple of first cousins. I sent a letter to the relative, telling my story briefly. After many months, she contacted me and filled me in on some family history, including that they told my birth father, but he wants no contact. I have 3 half-siblings that I have not been able to contact. The cousin sent me some photos, and I look exactly like several members of the family. If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doomscrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.